Welcome back. Today we're going to be tackling imposter syndrome, what it is and why it exists, particularly for identifying individuals. So, in short and very simply put, imposter syndrome is feeling like you're a fraud or a phony, going about your day-to-day life. More in a broader definition, it's an internal experience of believing that you're not as competent as other people perceive you to be. A lot of the time it's attributed to the professional world in terms of achievement and intelligence, but it can also relate to social context and perfectionism as well. So basically feeling like you're a fraud for doing something in any way, shape or form. Like I said, a lot of the time it is attributed to those in the professional fields. So whilst I'm talking about my experience as a transgender individual feeling like an imposter, a lot of the time imposter syndrome is related to women in the professional world. So it's not something that's purely a trans thing. 70% of the population will feel like an imposter or a fraud at some point in their lives, and a lot of the studies surrounding imposter syndrome do talk about women in the professional world. For example, women who become CEOs not feeling like they belong there because typically those jobs go to men. I'm not saying that is right, that those jobs go to men, but that is where those feelings come from. So feeling like they don't belong in that position. So how does it relate to trans people? So how does it relate to transition? So there's an overlap between social anxiety and imposter syndrome, and I feel like a lot of people when they come out with trans have this increased sense of social anxiety because you want to be perceived a certain way, and perhaps you aren't getting that out in the world. Feeling like you don't belong in social situations or feeling inadequate in the way that you're identifying. For me, it was very real, particularly when I didn't pass and I was starting to come out and have conversations about my gender with people who weren't just my close friends. Being out and about, all of a sudden I didn't feel like I belonged there. For some reason, I attribute that to this syndrome. So for myself and some other trans people that I have spoken to, imposter syndrome comes from not being perceived as my correct gender. So I identify as a male, but if I were to go out in public, not so much now, although it does still happen, but particularly pre-T, going out and identifying as a male, and I felt like I didn't belong in those spaces because I wasn't a real man, and then people would know that I wasn't a real cis male. So even though I'm a male, and it's a weird mental battle that goes hand in hand. I guess the best way for me to describe it to you or to other people, it's like that niggling voice in your head that's telling you that you aren't enough. It's saying that you can't go to a certain event because where you're going, people know. They're like, oh, they know me and I can't be there because what's the point in presenting as a male if they just know about my past, and I don't belong here because I'm not a real man, etc, etc. So I'm going to use an example throughout this video of the last Christmas party, the work Christmas party that I went to in 2019. I had been out, I'd been on hormones for about 4 months, I had the voice drop, things had started shifting, and I went in suit pants and a button up, so I went in masculine attire. I freaked out before we went. I was like, I can't go because they're going to see right through me. These people have known me since pre-transition. I can't take up a male space in that because I'm not a real male. And that was imposter syndrome. So I'm telling myself all these things, and that voice in the back of my head is saying that I can't go because I don't feel like I belong, or I feel like because I identify as a male, I'm being fraudulent. And I had to be talked down. So basically my partner and my friend who were here helped to talk me down and get me to the event. So imposter syndrome can set up, or it does set up, a negative cycle of internal questioning or internal belittlement. Even if you're achieving something good, it's that feeling that's telling you that you don't you don't deserve that good feeling or that good thing because you've only got that because of X, Y, or Z. So for me, that night that I went to the Christmas party, I was packing. And the reason that I was packing was because I didn't want anyone to look at me and think, oh, they're not a real man because they don't have a penis. So if they were to look at my crotch, I did have a bulge there. So to me, and how imposter syndrome fits into that situation is, I only passed as a male and people only called me by my correct pronouns because I was packing. So without doing that step, in my head, I would not have achieved that good thing. So even though I have achieved something, I've achieved being called the correct gender, the imposter syndrome part of that was telling me that I only did that because of packing. So that constant questioning and belittlement going around in your head. So why do trans people experience imposter syndrome when a lot of the articles that talk about imposter syndrome specifically talk about people in a professional setting? Our environment, socially or physically, as well as our own institutionalized discrimination against ourselves, can spur those imposter feelings. So people build confidence by belonging or by being validated. All of a sudden, once we start questioning our gender, we don't belong to these groups that we may have fit into before, so our confidence is completely shattered. Our environment gets rattled, and all of a sudden we don't belong anywhere, or at least for me. Sorry, I'm talking about my own experience here. Once I started questioning, I felt like I did not belong anywhere. I couldn't build confidence in any space because I didn't belong in those spaces, which has caused those imposter feelings to start in my brain. Those places that we turn for comfort, they're not there anymore, or they're not, we don't belong with gender A, or we don't belong with gender B. Our sources of comfort, or my sources of comfort, came largely from online. So I sought out validation, and I sought out confident building techniques from other trans people who had gone through this. And then once I left the online world and I stopped being validated, I was then left to question and have those imposter feelings come up in my head. A lot of us go online to seek those "you're not alone" feelings, and then you leave that safety net and you have to question your actions. So I don't fit into column A or B right now, so what leg do I have to stand on? If I try and fit into column A or B, I'm being a fraud because I don't fit into either right now. So you've stepped out into this world that you don't belong, you've stepped out into this world that you feel like you don't belong in anywhere, and you haven't given yourself the mental toolkit to find that confidence or reignite that confidence that you had. So what do we do about it? Combating these thoughts is extremely difficult when those around you don't understand what you're going through. So even though you and I might know what gender dysphoria is, and you might know that we feel like we're an imposter, it's not easy to talk to someone who's never gone through it because you know that they're not going to understand it. But internalizing it is going to cause you more stress. If you internalize imposter syndrome, you may lead yourself down the route of more social anxiety, potentially even depression and suicidal ideation and things like that. So what do you do? And I struggle with this, and I talk to my therapist about it and those closest to me. I'm going to give you 4 steps. There are a list of 10 on most articles online. I don't necessarily think those 10 are relevant. I am going to leave links down below if you want to read some of the articles that I read and some of the research that I did before coming into this video. That's up to you. I'm going to give you 4. The first one is acknowledge and share what you're feeling. You're feeling like a fraud. That's okay. Vocalize it. Pick someone in your safe space. It can be a partner, it can be a parent, it can be your therapist. If you don't have those 3 things and you're not supported, the online community is a great place to speak to people who have also gone through imposter syndrome. Speak to someone. You're not alone. The second one is separate feelings from fact. So I can't stress this enough. Only you can tell you what or who you are. That is no one else's decision. That's yours and yours alone. Step back from the moment, reassess, and then move forward. For me, in that night of the Christmas party, it was saying, no, I am a man. I wouldn't be going through an entire transition if I wasn't. So, acknowledging that I had those imposter feelings, but also stepping back and reassessing that they were just a feeling. And the fact is that I'm a man and I'm going to go to an event as a man, and that's okay. The third one is to focus on the positive. So that can be easier said than done, I know that, but try and take compliments where they come, even if they make you awkward. So whether they're self-given or they're given from others, use those words as a boost, as a confidence boost, and continue doing that and pave a path forward for yourself on that positivity. The fourth one, and probably the most important for me, and I would hazard a guess the most important for a lot of other trans people, is to change how you view failure. And I say failure because a lot of the time it's not necessarily a failure on your part, but it does feel like one. In a trans context, I'm talking about someone using your dead name or someone misgendering you, and taking that personally as a failure on your part, that you haven't done enough to get somebody to acknowledge who you are. It might be something like using a female restroom when you don't feel confident or you don't feel safe using a male restroom. I personally still view that as a failure for me, and it's really hard for my brain to rewire that. And I haven't done it so much recently, but I did a lot at work before moving to the new building where a unisex toilet was available, if I wasn't. Anyway, there's a whole other story in that. It can be a setback. Things in your brain like, how can I call myself a man if I've gone and used a female toilet? Regardless of the reasoning behind it, I've done it. Therefore, I don't deserve to call myself a man anymore. I'm a fraud, and the vicious cycle that goes on in your head. How can I call myself Kris if I keep responding to my dead name? Things like that. So, something that happened very early in this Christmas party is my boss came up and hugged me, and she called me a good girl. I wanted to die in that moment. So if the floor had opened up and swallowed me whole, that would have been great. I felt like I had to shrink away and I had to be small, and then those questions in my head, well, why do I bother? Why did I dress up and hypermasculinize if no one's going to acknowledge that I am a man? What is the point? So instead of doing those things, I braced through the discomfort and I went and found my safe space. I stayed with my partner and one of my very good friends, and they're my safe space, and that's where I stayed for the night because I knew that they viewed me the way that I want to be seen. For me, I also had to, using that failure, and I took a mental note that maybe I could do something different next time. Maybe I could dress up a little bit differently or do my hair a little bit differently, and use that as a driving force, as well as the positivity, using that failure and how we view it as a driving force for progression. So to me, it was more beneficial to brace and stay than it was just to throw in the towel and go home. You're not going to be perfect. That's okay. I'm not. Imposter syndrome gets me quite badly some days. Like last night, I went to sleep with my binder on. And I told my partner that I wanted a man's chest. And then I immediately panicked that I said I wanted a man's chest and not that I have a man's chest. And it was that moment that, that thought or that voice in my brain saying, well, you've just said that you wanted a man's chest. Does that mean you're just doing this for shits and gigs? Like, how dare you? So it still gets me. And then having to take that step back and realize what's happened and separate that fact from what I'm feeling. Speak up to those in your safe space. Know that imposter syndrome when transitioning is completely normal. Work towards being who you need to be for yourself and no one else. You're not an imposter and you're not alone. Alright, that's enough rambling from me. Thank you so much for watching, especially those who made it at the end. If you like the content, give it a thumbs up. If you want to subscribe, my face will be somewhere on the screen. Have you gone through your own bouts of imposter syndrome? Let me know below. Alright, bye everyone. Yay, we're done.